Well, from South Africa to Nigeria and some other parts of the continent, there are multiple cases of kidnap, and this is causing the people so much pain. The incidents of what exactly is happening at the moment, especially the two continents' biggest economies. School kids aren't safe. The homes are hardly secure, and traditional rulers and politicians are also affected. Local dwellers now walk and work with the fear of getting kidnapped by gunmen almost on a daily basis. Sadly, the police who are meant to protect lives and properties have been mentioned as enablers of kidnapping in South Africa, and this leaves the people to rue their fate. Tackling this growing epidemic has become a necessity, and leaving it untouched only makes it worse. That's our focus today on VSA. I'm Sulaiman. Well, kidnapping cases are on the rise in South Africa, and virtually every local now walks with great caution. Now, between July and September this year, there were at least 2,000 cases of kidnapping reported to the police in different regions in South Africa. This has increased by 28.6% since 2020 and calls for concern, especially as school children have been under greater risk. Now, some of these kidnapping cases have led to the rape of victims, and in some cases for revenge. Majority of these kidnappings are masterminded by syndicates who are local or foreigners in South Africa. Now, kidnapping in Nigeria is a different kettle of fish. Since December 2020, there have been at least 1,000 Nigerian school children kidnapped by terrorists, otherwise known as bandits, by the people and government. Now, about 3,000 Nigerians were also kidnapped in the first half of the year, with the majority having to pay ransoms to gain freedom. Now, in both Nigeria and South Africa's situation, there are regions badly affected. In South Africa, kidnapping has been more prominent in the Gauteng province, while in Nigeria it's highly recorded in the northwest of the country. Joining me to look at this is Herman Bosman, Kidnapping and Extortion Manager, TSU International in South Africa, and Kabir Adamu, a security expert from Abuja, Nigeria. Gentlemen, many thanks for joining us, and let's hope that the continent will be excited to get us, a sense of what exactly is happening. Let's start with you, Herman. What's the situation of kidnapping in South Africa at the moment?
Good evening to you and the viewers. Yes, sadly, as you have indicated, we've seen growth in about 20 to 28% year on year for the last basically 10 years. Kidnapping, not being a South African crime typically over the years, has grown to become a massive problem. And sadly so, children are targeted also in that, and the number of children taken also, as you've indicated, on the increase together with all the other cases. And it is definitely a concern that we need to address it in a very strategic manner very soon, or we're going to face a problem getting the grip on it.
Let me bring in Kabir. Kabir, once Nigeria has been on the spotlight, and when this story broke about what's been going on in South Africa, we felt for a bit it looks like if there is any possibility to have a nexus with what is happening in the south of Africa and the west of Africa and Nigeria specifically. So, but let's start talking about the factors that could be responsible for, kidnapping. Kabir.
Thank you, Sulaiman. In Nigeria, most of the factors that are responsible for kidnap we can run around it, but the number one factor is the weak security architecture, as it were, that allows criminals to carry out their activities, and then most times don't get punished. So what I'm trying to say in essence is the ability of the law enforcement agencies to arrest and punish offenders is not as effective as it should be. So a case, a good example is that of Evans. The case was well celebrated, and almost 2-3 years down the road, is yet to be prosecuted. In fact, he has even sued the authorities for damages and all that, despite what seemed to be an overwhelming evidence against him. So you've got cases like that. Several of them have arrested. Now, beyond that, you've got a huge youth pop bulge. Almost about 70% of the unemployment rate in Nigeria is occupied by youths. And unfortunately, this is from this pool that non-state actors, criminals, recruit from and use them to carry out their activities. Then thirdly, the lack of prosecution is providing an incentive, as it were. I like giving the example of the average, bandit, as it were, or let me use the word, herder, who inherited probably 4 cattle, and then he has to rear them over a period of almost 20 years. And then in between that period, the value of that cattle is probably, he sells it, let's say, for ₦1 million, each at 250,000 naira. Meanwhile, his friend who decides to go into criminality and, joins this kidnap for ransom gangs would come with, kidnap one person and probably get up to 10 million naira. And so, there is no basis really for comparison between the two. Now, if the law enforcement or criminal justice system was effective and they were arresting and punishing offenders, then he wouldn't have that incentive. He would probably be content with his legal means. But because it's not effective, that incentive for him to go is also there. Then you've also got the cultural element, which does not frown at ill-gotten wealth. I don't know how we came to this level in Nigeria, but there was a time when ill-gotten wealth was frowned at, and in fact the entire neighborhood would run away from any household that seemed to be associated with ill-gotten wealth. It's no longer the case at the moment, unfortunately. There seem to be some elements of celebration of wealth, irrespective of whether it's ill-gotten or not. So a combination of these factors are more or less the drivers of abduction or kidnap for ransom in Nigeria.
Well, let me come to Herman. Listening to Kabir, now you could see he has been able to explain some key things happening here in Nigeria, which you're also aware of as an expert, talking about the weak, security apparatus in the country, and he's also talked about culture. Once upon a time, an average African would socially ostracize you if he or she is in doubt of how you made your money. Now, all of a sudden, people now, worship people irrespective of how you made money. Now, let's talk about the reports coming from South Africa that some Nigerian, Colombian, Brazilians, and some local syndicates fuel kidnapping in the country. How is the South African government reacting to that piece of news?
Well, it's definitely true that syndicates more and more target South Africa, and when we look at the people arrested, it is a combination of locals and foreign people involved in kidnappings in South Africa. And I think the reason for that being also is that the habitat, the environment is conducive currently for syndicates to operate in South Africa. And as been said, we have also a problem with our socioeconomic conditions. We have a problem with functionality of the state as far as police functionality, intelligence, prosecution is concerned, education. It is all a government sector network that is a bit in disarray as far as kidnapping. If you look at corruption, that is extremely rife at the moment in time in South Africa, and kidnapping relies on corruption. If you have a lot of corruption, kidnappings will flourish. And that is what we see. Not too long ago, we had articles in our newspaper, and you may have read it, where police officers being arrested, even heads of kidnapping investigation and intelligence sector in South Africa being involved allegedly in kidnappings. So if you look at the factors being conducive for criminals and also syndicates flourishing in South Africa, you have it all. And we will have to address this collectively from the government side, looking at socioeconomic conditions, looking at corruption, and tighten the nut on these syndicates. Currently, with our economy and effective banking sector also still in place and money coming in from various sectors, it is a very conducive market for kidnapping in South Africa. And true so, I mean, I've been listening now, Mr. Evans, and I've studied a bit about Mr. Evans and also the way he's conducted kidnappings. And it's certainly copied in South Africa from various groups functioning in different silos, making it extremely difficult for the authorities, the police and intelligence services to get information regarding these syndicates.
Let me stay with you, Herman, before I go back to Kabir, because some people in South Africa have the gist that there is some form of connivance, by policemen, some accomplices who are also members of the security forces in South Africa. And that is why it is almost impossible for the authorities to quickly arrest this.
Yeah, and that is the insider collusion, the insider involvement is making it extremely difficult, and the public don't know who to trust. Who can you actually go to report this? Who can you trust that will help you? A lot of the foreign people that speak to me across Africa on a private level will meet up with me and they will raise this as a concern, that they're scared they will be targeted because they are foreign, and that they will be challenged because of them being in South Africa. And then also the police will bribe them in some cases before they will assist them. And this is definitely a concern that has been reported to me by various groupings, and we need to address that. We need to look at it, and the government will have to raise its voice much louder when we look at kidnapping. You cannot allow kidnapping to get out of control. And the same, I would personally believe that we even may have more kidnappings in South Africa than in Nigeria. Maybe when we have kidnappings here, they take 1, 2 or 3 people, maybe 4, as we saw with the Muti case. But definitely the number of incidents, it's alarming. We don't have hundreds of people being taken like the Chibok schoolgirls, but we certainly have an explosion in numbers.
Let's bring in Kabir here. Kabir, listening to Herman, he's also said the same thing as highlighted by you earlier. The environment is more or less conducive, and that is why these criminals are having a field day. Tell us, because in recent months there's been a reduction of school kidnappings in Nigeria. What's changed?
Not much beyond the sensitization, especially at the level of the state governments. There appear to be an awareness of what the risk elements are. So state governments have put in place certain measures, including reinforcing some of the vulnerable schools, or in certain instances they've shut down these schools and moved pupils into more safer locations. Where they've not done that, they have put in place additional security, layers of security, as it were. So the community is involved, the public security agencies are also involved, and then most states have also adopted their own state-level security operatives. Even though they are not well armed, they do have some little level of protection that they can defend themselves with, and sometimes even defend the pupils with. Then it also seems that the perpetrators themselves, for some reasons, have not, the will, the incentive for them to continue this mass abduction may have reduced. I say this with all sense of responsibility, because there are still schools that I know are still vulnerable to this type of attacks if the attackers decide to focus on them. And so it appears for some reasons they themselves are no longer interested in that. Anytime they decide they want to do, it's very possible that we'll see more mass abduction targeting schools. Now, the federal government has come out with 2 new policies to enhance the security around schools. Unfortunately, however, we haven't seen the implementation of those policies, and it's one of the key challenges that affects, federal government policies in the country. They do these things, and then most times they don't implement them. Unfortunately, this is another example of that type of, policies. But I've looked at that policy. One of them is what is called the Safe School Declaration. It's quite comprehensive. It has different elements that would serve as layers of protection for this school. So we're hoping as we go into 2022, we would see the implementation of that, policy by government. What the federal government has done is to produce a guideline for the implementation of the policy, and we're hoping that they would support states in using those guidelines to ensure that schools are better protected, and so hopefully this reduction that we're seeing would be sustainable, and it wouldn't be something that just passes after a period.
Kabir, because by every means that needs to be sustained. Listening to Herman a while ago, he said something that is so scary. Now we're dealing with numbers here, just as some other Africans watching today will be so amazed to see that there's some sense of big worry in South Africa, because he said if we decide to put it on the scale, you just might be shocked to see that it's either the numbers coming from South Africa could be higher than what we're seeing from Nigeria. But what has led to the predisposition of what is happening, especially in the Northwest and the Northeast, to kidnappings in the country? Because once upon a time, we thought it was just, confined to the Northeast.
So the same predisposing conditions that existed in the Northeast are the same conditions that we have in the Northwest. And I'll quickly mention a couple of them. The ungoverned spaces, so-called ungoverned spaces. These are forested areas and mountainous areas where these non-state actors hibernate and come out from time to time to carry out this kidnappings, as it were. And I mean, think about it, Sulaiman. If they kidnap 100 people, if these ungoverned spaces didn't exist, there is nowhere they can take them to. It's almost impossible, in fact, unfathomable to think that 100 people can be kept within a community as abductees. No. So that's why I think the most important element is this ungoverned spaces. And the most amazing thing is, a couple of years down the road into this saga, there is no single effort, by either the federal or state government to dominate these ungoverned spaces and make it impossible for these non-state actors to continue to use them for the purposes of abduction. Now, the second element is the gaps within the security architecture at the state level, especially in the Northwest. Now, the absence of enough security personnel, especially at the village level, is the same condition that existed in the Northeast that we now have in the Northwest, that allows these non-state actors to continue to operate. And then there also seems to be an element of organized sort of crime around this. And here, despite several other elements, I would like to mention the relationship between the terrorist groups in the Northeast and the criminal groups in the Northwest. It's common practice, especially in the Sahel, where terrorist groups engage criminal groups, sometimes to carry out abduction, and then the terrorist groups would take charge and negotiate for the release of these abductors. And for the simple reason that when it's terrorist groups, payment usually would be higher than if it were just criminal groups. And so it's a kind of symbiotic relationship between the two, and we are seeing that in Nigeria as well. However, there has been a challenge in terms of the ethnic composition of the two groups. There is a historical rivalry between the two groups that has made this type of partnership to be a little bit more challenging than it is in the Greater Sahel region. Then we should also talk about the semblance of political involvement in a place like Zamfara State as an example, where and there is enough evidence to suggest that there is a political angle to, the abduction, as it were. And let's not forget that a few months ago, the President Buhari, in a public statement, alleged that there is a weaponization of insecurity in the country, including this abduction and kidnap for ransom. So clearly, there seems to be a political incentive by certain quarters to allow for the continuation of this, kidnap for ransom, as well as to use it as a political tool to achieve some objectives. So this is kind of what is playing out in the Northwest, which unfortunately started in the Northeast and wasn't managed until now. It's also in the Northwest of the country.
Mark, let me bring in Herman. In Nigeria and South Africa, it's been so established that kidnapping happens in local communities, especially. How can the government improve security in the rural areas in order to stop such situations or places Kabir has termed ungoverned spaces?
Well, I firmly believe that all operations, you need to use information, and it needs to be intelligence driven. You need to have people on the ground that will come forward and assist the police, people that knows. There's definitely people, and that'll be in both countries, that must know what is going on, that must know who's involved, but are too scared to come forward. So the way it is managed should be intelligence driven, where the groups must be infiltrated and information be obtained in a very sophisticated manner and very, very well planned. And this must be done over many months. It's not something that's going to happen very quickly. It must be prioritized, number one, as a problem, admit that kidnappings has become a major challenge, and then go to the drawing board and determine what would be the correct procedures to follow in curbing this, preventing this. I do also agree that we must look at minimum sentencing. We must look at the end of the day, on all levels of government, how are we going to improve this? Many years back, we had specialized units that would investigate kidnappings. Currently, in South Africa, a normal local police station will have to investigate a kidnapping. Kidnappings are too advanced. It's organized crime. They are specialized in what they do, cannot be investigated by a local police station detective sitting with hundreds and hundreds of dossiers to investigate. There needs to be a team that will focus on this and coordinate, infiltrate, and put together all these case dockets to see if there's any synergy, any groupings that is in cahoots with each other, working together. And from that point of view, I would say would be a better approach than to look at it just as individual cases, because it's much too vested and integrated currently in South Africa as an organized crime structure.
Well, Herman, human trafficking, mob justice, robbery as some of the reasons for these kidnapping cases. Now, tell us, if you will, is there a point the South African government will have to incorporate vigilantes, as we've seen in some parts of Nigeria, to its security network?
Well, I haven't seen, and I would be careful to say, government involvement or, directly in the same regard as we would see in the northern part of Nigeria. We do not have cases in South Africa that is politically motivated to that level by fanatical groupings as such. Surely the rise of fanaticism and in Mozambique is becoming a bit of a threat to us because they're on our borders, and we have seen one or two incidents in KZN, KwaZulu-Natal, on our east coast where there's indication of involvement. But it's definitely on the rise, it's definitely here, and it can at any moment appear. And once again, the problem is intelligence. We need to find these groupings and eliminate and address it before it becomes a problem. We cannot wait until it is a problem that is currently in Nigeria in the north, east, and northwest. We cannot wait until we have that. We must stop and prevent it now. And that is once a political problem, and it needs to be addressed, and not secretly. This needs to be known to be addressed also. Too many things are just done behind the scenes, and you don't hear about anything, you don't see anything. Yes, there's safer school projects. Yes, there's here and there some other initiative, but that's not good enough. It needs to be a holistic approach when one look at this. And we cannot continue, and sorry that I come back to that, with the level of corruption. Any effort by anybody trying to curb this run into the problem of a possibility of corruption.
Well, Kabir, I know you mentioned that much, given the analogy of the good herdsman who's seen his own colleague gone, the other way. Kidnapping for ransom, which is already established as a very prominent thing here in Nigeria, is most of the time the reason these cases happen. It is safe to say poverty is sitting atop the ladder as a main cause of the rising kidnappings in Nigeria. Kabir.
So, Sulaiman, it's very easy for one to reach that conclusion. However, the studies that I've seen, criminological studies that have attempted to link poverty with crime have not been conclusive. In other words, there hasn't been any direct positive correlation, as it were, between poverty and crime. What, however, has been revealed is the several extraneous factors around poverty that would lead to crime. So in other words, it may not be the poverty itself, but the other factors around poverty. So in the case of Nigeria, the weak administration of criminal justice that we talked about before. So where someone is poor and then he knows that if he commits a crime, he's likely to get away with it, then the incentive to commit that crime will be there. Remember the crime triangle, where that element of punishment exists, and it makes it sometimes difficult for the person to commit crime. The second point is the absence of a guardian. So where there is poverty and then there is opportunity, then the likelihood of that crime will be committed. But where there is a guardian that is protecting that object that perhaps would be stolen, then poverty would not be enough. So I can give you several examples where studies have shown that it's not just poverty alone, but it must be poverty sometimes in combination of other factors. In the case of Nigeria, one key element that we need to emphasize is the absence of social provision, social investment programs. Even though this government has attempted to introduce social investment programs, it's not far-reaching, and frankly, it hasn't taken away the need within society. So you still see people living below the poverty rate without any form of support from the government. So I think it's just a combination of all of this. More importantly, the weak criminal justice system, where you have poverty and you have that, then crimes, including kidnap for ransom, will be committed.
We'll go on the break. When we'll come back, Herman and Kabir, you help us talk more about extortion, kidnapping for extortion, kidnapping for ransom, and see if there are things the citizens of these two countries and other parts of the continent can learn from you both to avert being kidnapped or help anyone who's in dire straits. if you just joined us, you're welcome. You're watching VSA here on News Central Television, and the continent is looking at kidnappings. Incidences of kidnapping have increased in countries with different state governments being forced to take drastic steps to stem the problem. In South Africa, kidnapping for extortion is not as common, with just 5% of its cases leading to exchanging money for freedom. There have also been the contentious issues of kidnapping and abduction, with South African law stating that some cases of abduction may have been labeled as kidnapping. Still with me here is Herman Bosman and Kabir Adamu. Gentlemen, thanks for your time. Now we're coasting home quickly here. Let's talk more about kidnapping for extortion and ransom. Is there a difference, Herman?
Well, from my point of view, extortion is the overarching terminology used. That is the crime that we register, where a person would obtain an advantage by unlawfully, intentionally putting pressure on a family, a victim, being at a company or an individual, to hand over that advantage. And that advantage can be information, it can be money, and that would be ransom. It can be minerals, gold, it can be anything, it can be cattle. So the actual advantage provided can be, even in many cases that we know, sex and human trafficking. But behind it all, the aim is to benefit financially out of it, even if it is information or the human trafficking side. At the end, there's money, and that is what is driving this to a large extent, is to obtain, by the person masterminding this, is to obtain that advantage, being money.
And Kabir, you see, and sometimes these kidnappings happen in broad daylight, right before, the people and even security agencies. The audacious, action of these daredevil criminals could mean connivance, could mean a lapse in the security of that community. Tell us more. How can security agencies or the people help protect themselves or citizens without having to pay this ransom, because the people may not even have faith in the security agencies?
Sulaiman, in kidnapping, the best thing one can do is to avoid being kidnapped. The moment he is kidnapped, he is at the mercy of the kidnappers, especially in a country like Nigeria, where the ability of the security agencies to rescue is very limited. In fact, in my practice, I can count the number of times that rescue has occurred. Most times it's the victim or his family paying, and then he or she is released. And then maybe you hear the security agents using the word rescue, when in reality it wasn't rescue. So the best thing is to avoid. And how does one avoid? First is we have this mantra that we call in security. It's a 3-word mantra that says awareness equals to anticipation and equals to mitigation. In other words, you need to be aware what are the tactics used by kidnappers in your location. Once you are aware, it means you can anticipate. So just to give you an example, we know that traveling along road travel routes in Nigeria, depending on where you are, there are certain routes that have high risk of abduction. So that means you are aware that if you travel on such a route, you're likely to fall victim to the activities of kidnappers. So what do you do in terms of, once you've anticipated, then you do the logical thing, which is to mitigate against it. And how do you mitigate against it? Either you fly or you use the train. So that's sort of, I would say, the general response I would give. Avoid, and avoid starts with being aware. Then once you're aware, you anticipate the risk of your exposure to that threat. And then number 3 is to mitigate against that threat. In certain instances, you may need the support of experts who understand these things better and would look at your profile, advise you either to change a little bit of that profile in order to blend better, or in certain instances, you may need armed protection around you. Now, the challenge with armed protection is that it has to be commensurate with the threat. What I see sometimes in Nigeria is people taking one policeman and putting in their vehicle with an AK-47, thinking that that person can protect them against kidnappers. Now, it's futile because you are dealing with sometimes 20, 30, or even more than that number. And so what would one armed policeman who is in a vehicle in a confined environment with an AK-47 do against 30, 40? In fact, he's more of a danger to you than a protection. So it has to be commensurate with the threat. And most times, an average individual cannot do that type of assessment. So that's where experts do come in to advise on how to reduce one's vulnerability to this kidnap for ransom. But that mantra I mentioned, being aware, anticipating, and then mitigating against the threat should be the golden rule for anyone who is bothered about kidnap for ransom.
Let me bring in Herman. I caught you a bit there nodding while Kabir was talking. Perhaps you have more to add to what he's just told us.
Well, I agree 100% with what Kabir has just said. What they do is they do information gathering, they then position themselves, and then they execute their devious deed. So we need to counter that. And the way to counter that is to know your environment, to understand what is it that we're facing, and to choose your activities wisely. In other words, if I look at the South African context, people are kidnapped en route between home and work and returning home, anywhere from where they leave the actual gate on the road and arriving at work, and then obviously returning. Yes, we have cases where people are taken at other locations, but by far the majority is whilst traveling on road. And it is because the routine it's known, the times are the same, the person's profile is very well published on the internet, on various social media platforms. And we need to look at that. If you are high net worth or a person that's well known and influential, you have to re-look at your profile. You have to re-look at how you manage yourself. If we just look at, for instance, express kidnappings, people still go to ATM machines at fuel stations in the middle of the night at the dark corner. Don't do that. Only draw money where it is safe inside a shopping center. So we need to change the way we live within society when we think kidnapping. We need to address it from ourselves, from our side. Who do we associate ourselves with? I normally refer to don't swim with the sharks. At some point, they're going to bite you. Don't do business deals with people that is devious and that you cannot trust. In other words, investigate very carefully who you're working with, who you do business with. We need to, on the other side, live positively, take control of the situation and not let it numb us and we feel helpless in this situation. But to be aware and address it effectively can make a big difference by applying knowledge to the topic. Don't go out at night and fill your vehicle up at 9, 10 o'clock. Make sure you do it in the middle of the day where there's a lot of people, where there's cameras, where there's light. And I do understand and I do know it's much more complex than what I'm saying. Depends on where you are in the world, and you have groupings of up to 40 with firearms taking you when they're well planned. I do understand, but there's a number of cases where people are taken that I could have prevented, where they go and jog in the evenings or early mornings alone. So there's definitely instances where the buddy system, where more people together when you go and do activities, can definitely curb this. I also know of people being kidnapped going to a meeting to a stranger that found and offered something lucrative, having researched this person well, saying so much about the person, and then the person trusted that stranger and go to the meeting at a location not known and being kidnapped. So from our side, we need to be more informed and taking control of how we look and address kidnappings.
You know, just as you both highlighted, the first thing is to ensure that you're not kidnapped. Let's stay with you, Herman. Negotiating with the abductors, the kidnappers, how easy a task is that?
Well, pretty much depending on the motive. If it is for financial gain, and purely a business type of negotiation, it is in most cases easier than having a disgruntled or domestic type of relationship where emotion plays a role, or you need to settle situations that cannot be fixed by pure negotiations and looking at trading finances. So looking at the ones that we deal with, in the majority of cases, the criminals want something constructive like money or information or the payment in a different country. Those ones are negotiated fairly well, and the majority of people are released and go home alive. What is important, though, is that the public must be careful who they involve in assisting them. Make sure you have people that you can trust. Research the consultant very well that's going to assist you. It's not only for now, also for later. People have information about you, and how they assist you can definitely make a huge difference in future cases as well. We need to get behind this whole problem of kidnapping and not just look at it short term, although saving a life is always our primary concern. And from looking at it in a negotiating perspective, you need to go and sit down, start on a clean page, and strategically manage the incident, looking at what is given to you, assessing it, and what you give back and what you say back. You cannot overpromise anything. You can only do your best in what is practically possible, and making sure that the person taken stays alive and returns home.
Well, Kabir, this negotiation, if it does get there, should the people, or, families, friends, should they be involved in that or get an expert to, engage the kidnappers? As a professional, I would recommend getting an expert. But then I also know the reality in Nigeria. Not many families can afford experts. And so what I can tell them is, as much as possible, let close family members avoid the negotiation, for the simple reason that the abductors, the kidnappers, would use emotions sometimes to get whatever they want out of the family. So they would sometimes, hurt the victim if they know it's the family members, just to get them to react and do what they want. So it's better if they can get somebody who is most likely a cleric or a clergyman. So if it's in the north and the victims are the kidnappers are likely Muslims, then getting a cleric who has a sound mind and is able to withstand pressure to negotiate on their behalf. I've seen a lot of cases like that where clerics, either Muslims or Christians, were able to get victims out based on the types of negotiation style they pursued. But having said that, because of the varied nature of abduction in Nigeria, a lot of times you see family members doing the negotiation themselves. And in certain instances, which is really unfortunate, when they go to deliver the ransom, they themselves are also abducted by the kidnappers. So again, as a professional, I would recommend the use of experts where it's possible and they can afford them. But where they can't, then they should get community leaders, especially clergymen, that have a sound mind and are able to withstand pressure to negotiate on their behalf. Are there cases, Herman, of families or family members, setting up fellow family members just to extort monies from them?
Well, I certainly do believe that, if I understood your question correctly, where do we have cases where family members are involved in kidnappings themselves or staging them? For sure, absolutely. I know for a fact that there's family involvement in many cases. Also, I know for a fact that people take children or take family members hostage to settle the score. In other words, to get money that is owed to them in a criminal vendetta type of kidnapping scenario where people need to pay money and they don't pay the money, and you know, they can't go to the police because they're involved in criminal activities, and then they'd rather use the method of kidnapping a relative or family member to force payment. And that is definitely so. There's also kidnappings that is staged to avert taxes. If we look at tax reports that must be in at certain times for companies, and there's a problem doing so, to disappear under the pretense of being kidnapped. I also know that happens to avert confronting the taxation position at that point in time, just to buy some more time. And also insurance. Insurance fraud is also a concern that one must look at when there's incentive for kidnapping to get hold of insurance money, and specifically in the times where the economy is not doing that great.
Kabir, you know, I'm trying to look at, you know, how to deter people now, bringing it to the justice system. You mentioned Evans earlier on, and for a moment, Nigerians are surprised that that case is still on. So now let us in on what the judicial system can do to deter, you know, would-be kidnappers from perpetrating such a, you know, heinous crime. Kabir.
So the Nigerian justice system relies on evidence. No matter how much you hate anyone, if you cannot present evidence to tie him to a crime, then it's very unlikely that the judge would find him guilty and, you know, sentence him. In our context, it's sad to mention that a lot of our law enforcement agencies don't even have evidence labs. And I refer to the inaugural speech by President Buhari in 2015, when he, you know, admitted to this and promised that one of the first things he's going to do is to ensure that our law enforcement agencies have evidence labs. Now, where you don't have evidence labs, what happened in the case of Evans would continue to happen. I remember when they showed his arrest, one of the first things that came to my mind is, oh my God, why is this happening? So the phones that they retrieved from him, you saw how they gathered the phones, you saw how they were taking pictures with the phone. Virtually every policeman that was there touched those phones with his hand, so thereby destroying whatever fingerprints that were there on that phone that could be used. You also saw how they entered the residences without any gloves and tampered with evidences. And so that is the difficulty. The second element is corruption within the judicial system. I mean, I don't need to speak a lot around this. Unfortunately, you know, this has been well documented. Even though I know there has been effort of recent to address that, but it's still a huge issue. This corruption can be in terms of financial, you know, incentives, or it could be as a result of affiliations of different sorts. Honestly, social, political, economic, name them, that could make the judge, you know, bend towards a particular direction. And then you also have sometimes the inability of both the law enforcement agencies and the judicial services to come to an agreement in terms of what laws they are going to use to prosecute, you know, a suspect for kidnap for ransom. There are sometimes too many conflicting and existing laws within the country on certain issues, and so if a good lawyer or judge is not, you know, careful in terms of how he manages it, then lawyers can always argue a way out for the suspects. So these are some of the reasons why prosecution in Nigeria has been very difficult. I don't want to go into the case of Evans too much so that we're not sub judice. It's a case that's still in court. But I think this little statement I've made will give us an idea of why prosecuting, you know, suspects, kidnap for ransom suspects in Nigeria is a little bit difficult.
I'll throw this to you, both of you, before we close. And let's start with you, Herman. Are there ways or systems whereby the police or the people can identify a victim or a kidnapper?
Well, I'm pretty sure that kidnappers are known to the communities. I'm pretty sure that somebody knows that they're up to bad and they're busy planning something. I think they're just very scared to come forward with that, because to who do you report it and who can you trust? They are scared to come to the police and say, so-and-so is involved in kidnapping or they're detaining somebody, because they're scared of reprisal. Where do they go afterwards? How can the police actually protect them, that these groupings, professional gangs, do not come after them, or when the case goes to court, will not basically attack them at court or even kill them or go to their homes and burn that down? So I think the fear is, and the problem is, how do we get society to come forward but be protected? And when I mean protected, from start to end, that the information is used, but identities are not reported and known and effectively managed.
Mm. And Kabir, the last word from you as we round off. Let's talk about examples. Looking at other countries, are there examples of how this was actually solved, that Africa needs to, borrow from? Is there a template that Africa is not looking at the moment?
Frankly, I am not aware of anywhere where they've dealt with this issue in a manner that I would say provides a template. The best example that comes to my mind is Mexico, and frankly, it's not a good example, because the situation has degenerated where now you have community-level security arrangements to protect individuals, and that's not where I think Africa should go to. Although, unfortunately, if we do not address the challenge, that is what is likely to happen in many African countries, where the trust deficit between communities and government is growing. And so the natural tendencies, communities would seek to protect themselves, just like it happened in Mexico. And that's a total breakdown of law and order. The whole essence of societies coming together and the social contract would have been defeated at that point in time. And so even though I do not have a template, I know what will happen if we don't address this. We can also look at advanced societies like the US and some parts of Western Europe, where the community, the individual identity management systems are very, very effective, where they know every member of the society. And so it's easy to identify offenders and then, of course, arrest and punish offenders. And where the social system is working and there is some form of social services provided for every member of the society, and that reduces the incentive for kidnap for ransom. So perhaps that's one thing that we should look at in terms of a template for reducing this. There's one key point that we did not mention while discussing this. That is the role of people around us, our domestic workers, as an example. A lot of times when kidnap for ransom cases happen, you would find that there are involvement of insiders, and sometimes these insiders are people around us, such as our domestic workers. So background checks, vetting of these domestic workers and drivers, sometimes our staff, direct staff, is very, very important. A good background check, a good vetting exercise would reveal red flags that hopefully would reduce the tendency for these persons to engage in criminal activities, including kidnap for ransom. One other key element is to introduce them into the banking system. The banking system requires them to do a lot of documentation. So that level of documentation would allow, investigation in case they do something wrong. You can use that. So also try to get their pictures, invite them, and take their pictures consciously so that they know you have their pictures. It's also a psychological way of reducing the tendency to commit crimes.
It's a lot you both have given to our viewers. At least top of it all is how to not get kidnapped. Well, kidnapping is still a foremost challenge across the world and even Africa, and you owe yourself the duty of protecting yourself, as highlighted by Herman and Kabir and your loved ones. Be alert, be security conscious. Many thanks for being such nice company, Herman Bosman and Kabir Adamu. I'm Sulaiman. Bye for now.